Okay, we are on page 21 of our syllabus. Right at the middle of the page, we've been talking about the chronological point at which the gift of prophecy would arise in the last days. And basically what we did is show that the little horn thought that it could change two things: the times, God's prophetic times, or God's prophetic calendar, and the law of God. And that in the time of the end, God would raise up a people that would restore the true prophetic scenario, would restore the times, and would also restore the law of God. And God called Ellen White to be the messenger to the remnant to restore both of these things. Now let's continue here at the middle of page 21. The Seventh-day Adventist Church today finds itself at a hermeneutical crossroads. The word hermeneutics means how we interpret the Bible. Some theologians within the church are even now questioning the soundness of the historical hermeneutical methodology. And I'll just make a parenthesis there. There's a pastor of a rather large institutional church of the Seventh-day Adventist Church today that wrote an article for Adventist Today, which is a magazine from the liberal fringe of Adventism, where he says that the second beast of Revelation chapter 13 is not the United States, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has become paranoid by its interpretation of that beast as being the United States. And that is only one example. There are others that are trying to point our eyes to the fulfillment of prophecy in Islam, over in the Middle East. And there are people who are reinterpreting the location of the trumpets. They're saying the trumpets are all future, and they're literal. I mean, they're almost like you wonder whether they ever really understood the governing principle of prophecy that is used by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So let's go back to the material. Some are offering preterist. That is, they're applying prophecies to the past, preterist interpretations of prophecy, and others are proposing futurist interpretations of prophecies that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has traditionally understood in a historical manner. Others are making dual applications of prophecies. And these are prophecies that have clearly been fulfilled already. Is it any wonder that some of these same theologians in our church are committed to political correctness when it comes to the preaching about the little horn, the sea beast, and the earth beast with lamb-like horns? Is it any surprise that some of the scholars within God's remnant church are even encouraging the Seventh-day Adventist Church to build bridges of understanding with Rome? And I can read you statements of scholars that teach in Seventh-day Adventist institutions that are saying this. Now, let me ask you, if God raises up a prophet at the end of time to restore the law and to restore God's prophetic calendar, do you think the devil is going to stay with his arms crossed? Or is he going to try and counteract the correction? He's going to try and react. Now, that's our next section. The book of Revelation informs us that Satan is not going to stay with his arms crossed while God's remnant church restores the prophetic times and the law. Revelation 13, 11 to 18 describes a future period when Protestants in the United States will do two things: continuing what the papacy did during the 1260 years. This beast that will arise from the earth is going to do the same things that the little horn did during the 1260 years. First, they will enforce the mark of the beast. That is the change in the law. Is that what the little horn did during the 1260 years? Change the day of worship? Yeah, so what is the United States going to do at the end of time? They're going to enforce the change. And eventually it will be on pain of death. This will be the future enforcement of the papacy's change in the law. Second, they will become the beast's false prophet by teaching the papacy's counterfeit prophetic scenario, that is, the change in the times. Is Protestantism doing that today? Which day of worship does Protestantism teach today? Sunday. What is their method of interpreting prophecy? If you read my book, Futurism's Incredible Journey, you're going to find that after the Protestant Reformation, two Roman Catholic scholars says we have to counteract, we have to arrest the growth of Protestantism. We're losing entire countries to the papacy. So a guy by the name of Luis de Alcázar, Jesuit from Spain, wrote a commentary on Revelation. He said, no, this little horn of Daniel 7, that was an individual called Antiochus Epiphanes. He lived 165 BC. And the beast, that was Nero, during the time of the Roman emperors. By the way, that is the Roman Catholic method of interpreting prophecy today. It's called preterism. The mainline Protestant churches of the world today use that method to interpret prophecy. I went to several Protestant commentaries from the mainline churches, Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, etc. They're preterists. They believe that these prophecies of the little horn and the beast were fulfilled with Antiochus Epiphanes, and they were fulfilled with the Roman emperors, Nero being the primary candidate. Now, if these prophecies were fulfilled with Antiochus Epiphanes and with Nero, what relevance do they have in relationship to the Roman Catholic Church? None. So they're looking to the past for the fulfillment. Most conservative Protestants today are futurists. And futurism was established by a guy by the name of Francisco Rivera, also a Jesuit from Spain, Roman Catholic, wrote a commentary where he tried to show that the Antichrist had not risen yet. The Antichrist is a nasty individual who will rise in the Middle East. He will rebuild the Jewish temple. He will rule there for 3.5 years. He will persecute the Jews. Does that sound familiar? So if the Antichrist, if the little horn and the beast are future in Israel after the rapture of the church, is there any relevance to the Roman Catholic papacy fulfilling prophecy? Not at all. So what happened to the Roman Catholic Church simply not only changed the Sabbath, but they changed the method of interpreting prophecy to hide who changed the Sabbath. Now let's continue here. For most conservative Protestants today, the United States is the good guy, and Islam is the deadly enemy. After 9/11, all eyes have turned to the terrorists in the Middle East. Is that true? The government, the media, and even many evangelical churches see militant Islam as the deadly enemy of the West. Many right-wing talk show hosts consider any criticism of the policies of the United States as unpatriotic and unchristian. What an overwhelming surprise, folks, it will be when they finally discover that the United States, by joining hands with the papacy, will commit national apostasy that will lead to national ruin. And Ellen White says that when the loud cry is proclaimed, and the church, the remnant church shows that Babylon is apostate religion fallen, she says people will, with their mouth open, and I'm paraphrasing, they'll say, we have never heard anything like this before. And they will take their position on the side of the Lord. What a shock it will be when they realize that prophecy was being fulfilled right before their eyes in Rome and in the United States, while they were looking for the enemy in the Middle East. Satan is a master at smoke screens and diversions. You know, to use a football terminology, there's what they call the counterplay. You know, those of you who are into football know what I mean. It's when the blockers, you know, they all block right. And so the other team says, the runner's coming this way. And then the runner runs down the left side. The devil is an expert in smoke screens, counterplays, and diversions. He does not want the world to know the true issues in the final conflict. And therefore, he has changed the meaning of Bible prophecy to hide who changed the law. He has deceived the religious world into thinking that the Antichrist will be a nasty individual who will arise and sit in a rebuilt Jerusalem temple for 3.5 literal years after the church has been snatched away to heaven. What importance do futurist preachers give to the book of Revelation? This is an important point. On the surface, it might appear that they are very much interested in it because they talk and write about it all the time. Aren't these evangelical preachers, John Hagee and Tim LaHaye and all these guys, aren't they always talking about what's going to happen in the tribulation, the rapture and everything? Why would they be talking about this if the church is going to be raptured to heaven before any of that happens? Are you with me? Now let's continue pursuing this. According to most, if not all, futurists, when John was told by a voice from heaven to come up hither, this was a reference to the rapture of the church. You know, Revelation 4 verse 1, God says to John, come up hither. I will show you what is going to happen after this. Futurists believe that the rest, this is important, that the rest of the book of Revelation from that point on will be fulfilled with the literal Jews in the Middle East after the church is gone from planet Earth. Why is that so significant? Listen. Think about the implications of this. Seventh-day Adventists have traditionally believed that the origin and destiny of our movement is clearly portrayed in the little book episode of Revelation 10. Remember? Eat it, it'll be sweet in your mouth and bitter in your stomach. We believe that applies to 1844, to the remnant church. We also believe that our divinely appointed origin is portrayed in Revelation 12:17, which we've already studied. And that our distinctive message and mission to the world is found in Revelation 14:6 through 12. But now listen. But if Revelation 4 through 22 applies only to the literal Jews during the future tribulation after the church is in heaven, then our divine origin, message, and mission are gone. We have no reason to exist. How many churches in the world are preaching the three angels' messages? How many non-Adventist churches in the world are preaching the three angels' messages? Zero. None. And one reason is, if Revelation 4 through chapter 20 applies to the future after the church is gone, Revelation 14 is irrelevant. It doesn't apply to us because it applies to those who are left behind. The devil is a sly individual, isn't he? He knows how to mute our message. It's by changing our method. Furthermore, continuing here, according to the futurist scenario, the enemies of God's people will not even come on the scene until after the rapture. So why worry about them now? If we are going to be gone, why even bother to speak about the beast, his image, and his mark? If that's after the rapture of the church, why even bother with it? Why bother to call people out of Babylon if that takes place after the rapture of the church? Focusing on literal Israel in the future in the Middle East hides the true identity of the beast and the false prophet. Does it? People will be looking for these powers at the wrong time and in the wrong place. And so the papacy in the United States will be fulfilling prophecy right before people's eyes, and they will not be able to see it because they will be looking in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong Antichrist. The very message, mission, and identity of the Seventh-day Adventist Church depend on our method of interpreting Revelation. And I would say Daniel also. If the fulfillment of Revelation 10 is yet future, like some in our own church are suggesting, then it has nothing to do with the origin and mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. If the fulfillment of Revelation 12:17 is still in the future, then it has nothing to do with the origin and identification of the remnant church that arose shortly after 1844. I firmly believe that God called Ellen White to set the record straight when it comes to end-time events. Amen. The book, Great Controversy, is a vital book for this day and age. It is the best commentary ever written on the book of Revelation. People say, what book do you recommend to understand Revelation? Great Controversy. Now, don't misunderstand me. Everything is not on the surface in the Great Controversy. Ellen White comments on many things, and she never quotes the verses. And one thing that we want to do in this class later on is we're going to find out how to detect what Ellen White has to say about something when she doesn't quote the verses that refer to that. See, we have to do some detective work. And like Daniel 11. Some people say Ellen White doesn't say anything about Daniel 11:40 to 45. Because she never quotes the verses, she never even uses the language anywhere in her writings. So she had nothing to say. Oh yeah, she had a lot to say. She just doesn't use the terminology. So you have to study the structure. You have to do a little detective work to find out where she's commenting on things, even though she doesn't use the specific verses. Ellen White once warned one of our school teachers about the dangers of his futurist and preterist views concerning the prophecies that have made us what we are as a people. Ellen White was aware of preterism and futurism, and she warned against it. Here is one quotation from 2 long letters that she wrote to John Bell, who was a school teacher. This is what she stated. We have a sleepless adversary, and he is constantly at work upon human minds that have not had a personal experience in the teachings of the people of God for the past 50 years. Now listen to this. Satan will take the truth applicable to their time and place it in the future. Events in the train of prophecy. See, what is prophecy? It's a train. See, that's historicism, the historical method. She says, events in the train of prophecy that had their fulfillment away in the past are made what? Future. And thus, by these theories, the faith of some is undermined. Are you understanding the importance of the spirit of prophecy in these last days when it comes to interpreting Bible prophecy? Plus, Ellen White was not only raised up to restore the commandments of God, to say, you know, God's people will be law keepers because they love the Lord. They're going to keep the Sabbath in honor of the Creator. God not only raised her up for that, God raised her up to provide a clear picture of the entire end time scenario as it is taking place and as it will take place. Because if you don't understand that, you're going to end up on the wrong side. Now let's go to the next section, the historical sequence of Revelation 13. Let's review Daniel 7. I like to review a lot. My wife says, you repeat and repeat. And I say to my wife, how do you suppose that a parrot learns to talk? By repeating, right? So it's by repetition that we learn, you know. The more we repeat, the more it is recorded in our memory, because we are impacted by our words, believe it or not. And so let's review Daniel 7. Lion, bear, leopard. 4th beast, for a while by itself. 10 horns, that kingdom is divided. Little horn, 1,260 years. It must lose its dominion at the end of the 1,260 years, because if it didn't, then it ruled longer than 1,260. If it lost it before the 1,260, then it didn't rule 1,260. So it loses its power at the end, and then you don't have much after that. You know that this power is going to be ruling at the end because it will be destroyed by Christ. So we know it must recover its power at some point after the 1260 years, but it's not real clear there in Daniel 7. Revelation 12 begins in the Old Testament. The woman has the male child in her womb. Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, Old Testament period. Then you have the dragon beast. That's the same as the fourth beast of Daniel 7. The dragon beast has how many horns? Has 10 horns. And then we find that the dragon beast with 10 horns persecutes whom? The woman. For how long? Time times the dividing of time, the 1260 years. But Revelation 12 takes us a step further, because it tells us that the earth helped the woman by providing refuge, and then it speaks about a final persecution that will come against God's people, against those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So Revelation chapter 12 takes you beyond what Daniel 7 explicitly says, because it speaks about the earth helping the woman towards the end of the 1260 years, and then it speaks about a final persecution by the dragon against God's people. It's the same dragon that persecuted during the 1260 years. Right? So is the dragon, which persecuted the woman, the Satan through the papacy, is that going to have a resurrection and also persecute at the end? Absolutely. Now with that in mind, we go to Revelation 13. Revelation 13 also helps us understand the time when God will restore the gift of prophecy to the church. In fact, Revelation 13 follows the same basic historical sequence as Daniel 7 and Revelation 12. I want you to see the parallel. Revelation 13 is going to follow the same order as Revelation 12 and as Daniel 7. Notice the sequence of Revelation 13. Revelation 13 verse 2 mentions the first three beasts of Daniel 7. It says, "Now the beast, which I saw, was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion." Is that the Old Testament period? Yes. Is it the same as Daniel 7? Is it the same as the period when the woman is crying out for the deliverer? At the same period. But now we have a fourth beast. Notice Revelation 12 verse 3. It says, "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and what? And 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head." So is there a fourth beast? Yes. What beast is this? It is Rome. So you have a dragon beast. Does it have 10 horns? Yes. According to what we studied, the 10 horns come out afterwards. Daniel 7 makes that clear, right? So you have to superimpose one prophecy on the other. You have to compare one with the other, just like you have to compare one gospel with another. You know, you look at the inscription above the cross. You know, one evangelist says, "The King of the Jews." Jesus, the King of the Jews. One of them has Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. So if you want to know what the complete inscription had, you have to go from one evangelist to the other. You do the same in prophecy. You have to go from Daniel 7 to Revelation 12 to Revelation 13. You have to complement all of these prophecies that follow the same sequence. Are you following me or not? Now, so you have this fourth beast, this dragon beast, after the first three. It has 10 horns, but then it's going to do something. Notice Revelation 13 verse 2. Now, this dragon beast is going to give its throne and its power and its authority to the beast from the sea. It says, "Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet like the feet of a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion." And now notice the dragon. This is the fourth beast, right? With the 10 horns. The dragon gives the beast his what? His power, his throne, and great authority. So what is the next power on the scene after the dragon beast that has 10 horns? It is another beast that receives its power from the dragon. And how long does that beast rule? Well, let's notice Revelation 13 verses 5 and 7. Is this power the same as the little horn? Is the beast the same as the little horn? Yeah, it's in the same identical spot in the sequence, and it does the same things. Notice, verse 5. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Did the little horn do that? Yes. And he was given authority to continue how long? Same time period? I won't go into how 42 months is equal to time times dividing of time and 1260 days. You already know that. Notice verse 7. It was granted to him to make war with the saints. Is that what the little horn did? Yes. And to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So are we following the same sequence? After the dragon with 10 horns, do you have the beast that rules the same time period, 42 months? Yeah. It's following the same order, Revelation 13. But what happens at the end of its period of dominion, the 42 months, something happens. Notice Revelation 13, verse 10. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. Who was it that led into captivity? The papacy, the beast. How long did it lead into captivity? 1260 years. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Who killed with the sword? The papacy. So the same sword that the papacy used to kill was the sword that was going to give it its deadly wound. Are you with me? Somebody might say, well, but it doesn't say there that it doesn't say the beast did. It says whoever kills, whoever leads into captivity. It doesn't say that it's the beast. Well, we know from verse 14 that it is the beast. Notice verse 14. Speaking about this beast from the earth, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. That is, the second beast does this in honor of the first beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So who is it that led into captivity and wounded with the sword? The beast. The beast that ruled how long? 42 months. Now the question is, what is the sword that gave the wound to the beast? See, the beast used the sword to kill God's people. So the same sword that the beast used to kill God's people is the sword that is going to give the deadly wound to the beast. So the question is, what is the sword? Many times people answer the Word of God, because Ephesians says that the sword of the Spirit is the Word of God. But in the Bible, symbols are flexible. They don't always mean the same thing. You have to take into account the context. For example, if I mention a lion, what does a lion represent symbolically? Can it represent Jesus? Can it represent the devil? He goes as a roaring lion. Can it represent Babylon? Can it represent Judah, the son of Jacob? Yeah. So just because you find lion doesn't always mean the same thing. Leaven. Leaven represents sin. But it also, in the parable that Jesus gave of the leaven, represents the Holy Spirit that's placed in the church and causes the church to grow. So just because you have sword here, and one text in the Bible says that the sword is the Bible, it can't be the Bible here, because the papacy did not use the Bible to kill people. Are you following me or not? The sword that the papacy used to kill is a sword that would give it the deadly wound. The papacy did not use the Bible to kill anyone. So you have to go to another text that tells you what the sword means in other contexts. And in Romans 13, 1 through 4, you have this explanation. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And God appoints the authorities that exist. What does this mean when it says the governing authorities? What is that referring to? The civil power, to the state. Verse 2. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God. And those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers, there it's clear, are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? In other words, do you want to not fear the government? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear what? The sword in vain. So who bears the sword? The civil power. What does that mean, that the civil power bears the sword? Does the civil power have the right to punish someone who kills somebody? Does it have a right to punish someone who steals somebody else's property? Does it have a right to sentence children who abuse their parents? Yes. How about somebody who ruins somebody else's reputation by lies, false witness? Yes. The civil power has been established to preserve the civil order. And it has the sword, which means that if somebody violates the civil order, it can use the sword to punish individuals who violate civil law. The problem is the papacy used the sword, not only, it used the sword not to punish violations of civil law, but to punish violations of the first table of the law. And what was it that the papacy used? The papacy used the power of the governments of Europe to kill those who were not in harmony with the church. Do you know how it worked? First of all, there was a church trial. There was an inquisition, a church trial, where you had the priests and you had cardinals and everything to examine the so-called heretic. And after the church trial, usually they would determine that the person was guilty of heresy. But the church didn't take people out and kill them. What they would do is they would say to the emperor, as in the case of John Huss, they would say, hey, the church found this guy guilty of heresy. You got to kill him. And so the papacy used the power of the state, used the civil power to persecute those who were not in harmony with its teachings and its practices. It joined church and state. And this is the subject for next year's anchor. We're going to study all these prophecies. They're fascinating. There's so much that we haven't seen as Adventists in these prophecies. Because we have the tendency simply to repeat and repeat and repeat what has been written and what people have said. And we don't go to the text and study it for ourselves. There's so much more there than meets the eye. And by the way, I'm a good solid Adventist. I'm traditionalist when it comes to interpretation of prophecy, but there's so many details that confirm and strengthen our view as Seventh-day Adventists, our view of Bible prophecy. It's amazing. And so, we find in this particular case, in Revelation chapter 13, the same sequence that we found in Daniel 7 and that we found in Revelation chapter 12. Now, let's go back to our material. You understand what the sword means? By the way, what was the power that gave the papacy its deadly wound? France. It was the civil power of France. Did France take away the sword? France said, listen, you've been using us to persecute people, now you're going to get a little persecuting yourself. The sword of France, the state, rose against the papacy and gave the papacy its deadly wound. The sword that the papacy had used is a sword that gave the papacy its deadly wound. Was that the end of the story? No. Revelation 13, verse 11. At the time that the papacy receives its deadly wound, another beast rises from the earth. What does the earth represent? We encountered the earth in Revelation 12, didn't we? The earth represents the territory of the United States that provided refuge for the persecuted ones in the old world. But now we have a beast that rises from the earth. A beast rises in that territory. Are you understanding me? What does a beast represent? A nation or a kingdom. Now, in that territory that provided refuge for the woman, now a nation is going to arise in that territory. It's following the same sequence. Are you with me? And that nation is going to have two horns like a lamb, but it is going to speak like a dragon. Which dragon? Listen carefully, folks. This is one point that we've missed as Adventists. The dragon in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation always represents Satan working through Rome. What was the power that tried to destroy Christ when Christ was born? Satan working through Rome, Herod. What was the power that tried to destroy God's people during the 1260 years? The little horn was the papacy. But who was behind it? The dragon persecuted the woman. It was the devil working through Rome. So my question is, if this beast from the earth speaks like a dragon, he's speaking like Rome. You didn't get that? You can't say, Rome tried to kill the child, and Rome persecuted the church, and then you have the same dragon. You say, well, that dragon, represents China. Because they use a dragon. No. You have to respect context. And so if it speaks like a dragon, it's speaking like Satan through the instrumentality of Rome. And by the way, that can be proved beyond a shadow of any doubt at the bottom of page 25. Listen carefully. Every beast that we find in Daniel 7 fights against the previous beast to take away its power. The bear annihilates the lion. The leopard annihilates the bear. And the dragon takes care of the leopard. But in this case, this beast from the earth, instead of fighting against the beast that existed before, it helps it recover its power. Are you with me? You say, how do you know that? The bottom of the page. This beast speaks like a dragon. And the dragon represents Satan working through Rome. We're told that it exercises all of the authority of the first beast. So by whose authority does this beast from the earth function? It exercises all of the authority of the first beast, which represents the papacy. It commands everyone to worship the first beast. It makes an image of the first beast. It imposes the mark of the first beast. Are you with me? Basically, what this is saying is that the United States is going to be the instrument that Satan is going to use to restore the power of the papacy. So the deadly wound was not healed in 1929. Because it's not Italy that would heal the deadly wound, it is the United States that will return the sword of civil power to the papacy. Are you with me? Now let's continue here. The top of page 26, we're almost finished with this segment. The first beast changed the times and the law, so the second beast must mirror these two characteristics. Is that clear? It makes an image of the first beast. Hello? Revelation 13, verse 13 and 16:13. Notably, the beast from the earth is called what? What is the beast from the earth called? The false prophet. Why would the devil raise a false prophet? In response to the true prophet. Are you seeing the connection with Revelation 12:17? God says, I'm going to restore the true gift of prophecy to God's people in the end time. This prophet will be instrumental in establishing a people that keep God's holy law and a people that have a true comprehension of Bible prophecy. Does the devil know that God was going to raise such a prophet? He says, what I'm going to do is I am going to enforce the mark of the beast, which is the change in the law, and I am going to raise a false prophet to hide the true prophet who is trying to establish the true prophetic scenario. So let's go back here. The beast from the earth is called the false prophet. We are told that this false prophet will perform signs and wonders, even bringing fire down from heaven in the sight of men. It says there, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And then a little bit later on in Revelation it says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the what? False prophet. So is the devil going to raise a false prophet to try and counteract the message of the true prophet? Absolutely. So are you seeing the connection here? The little horn thinks that he can change what? Times and law. God says at the end of this period, I will raise up a movement that will say that we're supposed to keep God's law and that will have the true gift of prophecy in its midst and show the true prophetic scenario. So the devil says, I will respond by raising up a false prophet that will impose the mark of the beast, the change in the law, and that will change God's prophetic scenario. How many of you are understanding what we're saying? Who is that prophet that God raised up? Ellen White, folks. Just read the book Great Controversy. It's like reading the newspaper. Now let's finish by talking about characteristics of false prophets. False prophets have 2 characteristics, 2 main characteristics in the Bible. Number 1, they teach God's people to disobey God's law. And number 2, they tell people what they want to hear, portraying prophecy as it will not be fulfilled. Are those the characteristics that we've been discussing? Let's read the main passage in Scripture that describes false prophets. Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5. Moses had this clear long ago. If there rises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, see any connection with what we just read in Revelation 13? False prophet will perform what? Signs and wonders to deceive the whole world. And the sign or wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God. Are you catching the picture? What does a false prophet do? He turns people away from the commandments of God. What does a true prophet do? Just the opposite. Notice Jeremiah 26, verses 4 through 6. Jeremiah 26, verses 4 through 6. I want you to notice that law and the gift of prophecy are linked together. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord, if you will listen to me, to walk in my what? In my law, which I have said before you, to heed the words of my servants whom? The prophets, whom I sent to you, both rising up early and sending them, but you have not heeded, then I will make this house like Shiloh, and will make this city a curse to all the nations of the earth. So what is? Keep my law and listen to my what? To my prophets. Interesting. Both things linked together. Isaiah 8 verse 20 links the law and the testimony. Isaiah chapter 8 verse 20, folks, when it says the law, it's speaking about the writings of Moses, of which the 10 Commandments are a portion. And the testimony would be the prophets up till that point, because the testimony is the testimony of Jesus. And so if somebody rises and says, I'm a spokesman for God, what is the litmus test to see whether they're true or counterfeit? To the law and to the testimony. That means to the writings of Moses and the prophets, which is all the writings that existed up to this point. If they do not speak according to this word, if they don't speak in harmony with the law and with the prophets, it is because there is no light in them. They are in darkness. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 32 says, and the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. In other words, if a prophet arises, he must speak in harmony with previous prophets. False prophets are detected by their attitude towards the law of God. Matthew 7, verse 15 and verses 21 to 23, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Cast out demons in your name? And done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Why doesn't he know these individuals who supposedly prophesied in his name? I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Incidentally, that word lawlessness is translated in 1 John 3:4, transgression of the law. That's one word, the word anomias in Greek. So this could be very well translated, depart from me, you transgressors of the law. Are you catching the picture? You read Jeremiah. We're told there in Jeremiah that the people loved certain prophets that came and said, peace, peace. All's well. They said, this, what Jeremiah is saying, that we should subject ourselves to the king of Babylon, don't buy it. Nebuchadnezzar never going to come. This city's never going to fall. It's going to stand forever. God has promised it. And the people love to hear that. Say, oh, what a wonderful message. Thank you so much. But there was no light in them because they preached what people wanted to hear. Jesus said, beware of the fact, beware of the moment when everybody speaks well of you, because they did this with the false prophets. And this makes me reach a very interesting conclusion. And that is, you look today at the most popular person in the world, it's Francis I. Hands down. He was even on Rolling Stone magazine's cover. Say, how in the world could he ever be on that magazine? But, he's been on Time, he's been on all of these magazines, and people rant and rave about him. Even 78% of Americans look at him favorably. And, he's just loved everywhere. And so you say, wow, he's got to be God's emissary because everybody loves him. Is that so? Jesus said, so they love the false prophets. Incidentally, do you know why they love him so much? Because he says what the world wants to hear. Who am I to judge gay people? And he speaks about global warming, a favorite subject of the secular media. And he speaks about the need to feed the poor. And so people say, wow, and I'm not saying there's a bad message, but it's what the world wants to hear. But true prophets will tell the truth, and they will be hated. There is no prophet that I know of in Scripture that was loved by the people they were sent to. In fact, you might have heard this story, and I'll conclude with this, our session this morning. My wife and I last year were invited to go to New Jersey, and I had a series of meetings there in a church in West New York, but West New York is in New Jersey. And one afternoon, the lady who invited us to go there invited us to her house to have a meal. So that afternoon we went. It was before the meeting. And we noticed that not only we were there, but there was also a young man whom we had not, we hadn't officially met, although he had been at all the previous meetings. And so he shared his testimony with us there at the table. He said, I was standing on a street corner one Sabbath morning, and I saw this lady walking down the street, very nicely dressed with a Bible in her hand. And he says, I thought to myself, where in the world can this lady be going on a Saturday morning dressed up so well with the Bible? Because it was like 8:30, near Sabbath school time. And so he went to her and he said, ma'am, where are you going? So nicely dressed with the Bible. She says, I'm going to church. He said, you can't be going to church. Today's Saturday. You got the day wrong. People go to church on Sunday. So she said, no, not us. We go to the church on Saturday. He says, really? There's a church that keeps Saturday? She said, of course. The Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's my church. He said, well, can I go with you? She said, sure. Come right along with me. So together they went to the church. When he got to the entrance, he says to the elder who was greeting people there, he said, is this the church that keeps the seventh-day Sabbath? And the elder said, yes, it is. He said, well, then this is my church. So I went into the church, sat down, enjoyed Sabbath school. During the worship service, the pastor read a quotation from Ellen White, and he said, let's see what Ellen White has to say in the spirit of prophecy. So this young man never had heard the name. He says, Ellen White. I wonder who she was. I think when I go home, I'm going to Google the name, and I'm going to see who that Ellen White was. Well, when you go to the websites, 90% of them are just inimical to Ellen White. I mean, they're just terrible, terrible in their comments about Ellen White. By the way, everything they say has been answered by the White Estate. You can go to the White Estate website, and they have an answer for everything that they criticize. You'll find some of those things in the book, 101 Questions, and some of the material in the syllabus. So anyway, he went home, Googled the name Ellen G. White, and all of these terrible websites come out. Lambasting, she was a plagiarist, she was a liar, her predictions were not fulfilled, she was involved in Freemasonry, all of these things. And so the young man said, I thought to myself, is this really the church that I want to belong to? They said, I think I'll go next Saturday. So he decided that we'd go to church the next Saturday. And so he goes to church after having looked at all of these negative websites about Ellen White. And the elder was there, and he met him. He said, come on in. Glad you're here. And the young man sat down, and I'm telling you the story as he told it afterwards. He said, after I looked at all of these websites, I said, man, is this the kind of church that I really would like to belong to? I don't think so. He said, but then I started thinking, I can't think of one single prophet in the Bible that the people liked. In fact, most of them were hated. So if Ellen White is hated so much, she must have been on the right track. And so he says to the elder, I've been doing some research on Ellen G. White. I'd like to know if you have anything that she's written that I could read. And the elder said, oh, of course I have. I have a book, The Great Controversy. And he says, well, can I have a copy? He says, yes, you can have it. So the elder gave him a copy of Great Controversy. Went home, read the book in a week, the whole book. You're talking 800 pages in Great Controversy. He read the whole thing. And the next Sabbath he came to church, and the elder was there. And he said, sir, there is no doubt whatsoever in my mind, now that I've read this book, that this woman was inspired by the Holy Spirit. He says, because I've studied history, I can see what's happening in the world, and what she wrote so long ago is so precise with what has happened and what is happening now. To make a long story short, this individual who decided to research things for himself instead of going by the negative websites was baptized, and he became a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church very recently, just last year. And as he told the story, he says, now I'm witnessing to my family, I'm witnessing to my fellow workers, I'm witnessing to anyone that I can find, and I'm distributing copies of the book, The Great Controversy. Folks, if we don't cry out, the stones will. God will find a way of sharing the message. If it's not us, God has 1,000 ways of which we know none. The main thing is that we must study for ourselves. We must research these things for ourselves. Let's not take what other people say. People didn't love Ellen White, even in her day, because she said things that they didn't want to hear. She was politically incorrect. She rebuked sin. She openly was critical of decisions, wrong decisions that were made even by the highest leaders in the church. And therefore she was disliked, because nobody likes to be rebuked. And yet rebuke can be one of the greatest blessings for our own personal experience. And so, as we've examined this particular subject, we know that God called Ellen White at the right time, in the right place, and with the right message. It is clearly delineated in the chronology of the prophecies of Daniel 7, the prophecy of Revelation 12, and the prophecy of Revelation chapter 13. And I might mention also that it's contemplated in other prophecies which we did not cover, like Joel chapter 2. You know, and Revelation chapter 6, where it speaks about the great earthquake. And then it speaks about the signs in the sun, the moon, the falling of the stars. And the prophetic gift is presented within the context of those signs, shortly after those signs appear. So there are many ways in which this can be approached. And any way that you approach it, you will find, if you have a sincere heart and an open mind, that God has raised up this special gift for this time and this place. And woe to us if we don't take advantage of this wonderful gift.
Visit secretsunsealed.org for annual class dates and topics. Anchor is a seminary-level course of study on the fundamentals of Seventh-day Adventist theology taught by Pastor Stephen Bohr and guest theologians. Seating is limited.